As a facilitator, we're trained to create these beautifully stitched gatherings. But then COVID hit, and many of the tools that we have to stitch, a table to gather around, doorways to walk through, side conversations, have been removed. And so as a facilitator, I'm now trying to figure out, how do we create meaningful connection despite these new obstacles?
Hello, Priya. Thank you for talking with us. Before we begin our conversation, I'd like to hear more about you. Can you tell us how you got into this work of making gatherings meaningful?
Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be with you all. I got into this work, I think, like so many of us, kind of half choose, half fumble into our work, which is that it starts very much from my childhood and my kind of story of growing up. My core work is as a group conflict resolution facilitator. That's my day job, meaning I work with groups that are navigating some kind of difference and trying to sort it through. And my mother is Indian and my father is white American. He's actually from Iowa. And I actually have an aunt who lives in Missouri. So we have a Missouri connection. And my parents, for the first kind of 12 years of their marriage and their life, they were kind of each other's source of adventure. They lived in Southern Africa. They lived in Indonesia. I was born in Zimbabwe. And a few years later, they moved back to the US and eventually to Virginia. And within a year, they separated. And within 2 years, they divorced. And within 3 years, they each kind of remarried other people. And people who in some ways represented their original worldview, kind of the worlds from which they each came. And I'm their only child, and they had joint custody. And so every 2 weeks, I would go back and forth between these two homes. And one home was and still is an Indian, British, Buddhist, vegetarian, progressive, incense-filled, landmark for me, for those of you who know what that is, household. And then I would drive 1.2 miles to my father and stepmother's home, and it was and still is a white American, evangelical Christian, conservative, Republican, twice a week church-going family. And I was part of both. My name is Priya Parker, and you can kind of guess which side is which. And I have always been really interested in when and why and how we come together, and when and why and how we come apart. And so the core work, my husband often jokes it doesn't take a shrink to explain how I got into the field of conflict resolution. But I really came into my work and the work of groups through kind of sorting out my own family and families, and also seeing from these two very different cultures that there's many ways of being, and that much of the way we do things is invented. And that's really the core of the art of gathering, which is we inherit some stuff continues to make sense, and a lot of it made sense at a specific time and no longer serves us. And I think part of the artful gatherer is having the discernment and the courage to figure out, what is the need now in front of us? Who needs to be a part of it? And how might we invent new ways of coming together?
Right, thank you. So can you tell us a bit more, and thank you for sharing your story and your background with us, but can you tell us a bit more on what inspired you to write The Art of Gathering?
So it was built kind of out of frustration, to be honest. I saw it so much in our popular culture an assumption that to make a gathering work, you have to get the things right. You have to put the fish knife here and the wine glass here. You have to have a fancy house or have the right lighting. And, maybe now in a pandemic, lighting seems a little bit more important. But as somebody who didn't grow up in a fancy house, as somebody who is not a very good cook, as somebody who really seeks building meaning with other people, it felt both inaccessible, but also like not really true. And I knew as a facilitator, which is what I was trained as, that yes, getting some of the basics, making people physically comfortable, kind of is what I would call hygiene. But it's not the point of connection. You don't connect through the placement of the napkin. That memorable. Why some dinners last through the night and you kind of leave feeling deeply moved, or you wake up the next morning and you just kind of feel happy, and others perhaps even the opposite, or meetings or conferences. And I wanted to write a book that looked at why and how anyone can create experiences that matter.
Sure. So you're probably more about, like you discussed with placement of things, you're probably more about what makes us connect on more of a human level versus is everything perfect and is everything in its right place.
And even deeper than that, not being stuck to a specific form.
Okay.
So the biggest part for the art of gathering, I'm a facilitator, but there's a lot of facilitator manuals, right? I could have written there, and there's a lot of really good facilitator manuals. I wanted to write a book for people who have never heard the word facilitator before.
Gotcha.
And so how I did that was, in addition to kind of sharing my own lens, I interviewed over 100 types of gatherers in all types of contexts. A rabbi, a photographer that has 7 minutes with a head of state and has to figure out how to get the right shot when there's also 12 bodyguards in the room trying to not have that happen, a choir conductor. And I asked them each, when it works, when you create a transformative experience with and for other people, like why and what can the rest of us learn? And more than form, the biggest mistake we all make is that we assume that the purpose is obvious. We assume that the purpose is shared, and we assume we have to do it in a certain way. So the biggest thing that they did in terms of gathering is they first asked, what is the need, rather than what is the form?
Right. So with the pandemic in mind, I'd like to pick your brain a bit. What did gathering mean for you pre-COVID, and what does it mean for you now? How have things changed?
How much time do you have?
We're all together, so as much time as you could take.
Exactly. Just I guess some table setting metaphorically. So I define a gathering as any time 3 or more people come together for a purpose with a beginning, middle, and end. So a wedding is a gathering, a bat mitzvah is a gathering, a church service is a gathering, a classroom is a gathering. And I think of a gathering as different than a community. So communities have gatherings, and gatherings can build community. But when I say gathering, I really think of like a specific unit of time that any of us can improve. And so I think pre-COVID, I think one of the big differences I see is that so much of what helped us come together, like the physical infrastructure of things, has basically been like stripped away.
Right.
So something like doorways. We think of a door is both a physical entryway, but it's also a psychological entryway, right? I'm leaving one room from another. I'm leaving my outside life to my inside life. I'm leaving my administrator hat and I'm entering as a teacher or as a student.
Right.
And now all day long, we're just clicking Zoom buttons, enter, leave, enter, leave. And so part of what's happened for all of us in the pandemic is we have to create the kind of psychological structures virtually that previously we didn't necessarily have to think about. And so for me personally, I was working, kind of a peek behind the door. I was working with the New York Times on a podcast that was supposed to be called Gathering with Priya Parker. And we'd been working on it for 10 months. And it was kind of like, I don't know if you know the show Queer Eye, but it was sort of like
Yes.
Queer Eye for gatherings. So someone would call up and say, I want to reimagine my wedding, or I want to reimagine our nonprofit gala. You know, it doesn't represent the values that we say we espouse. How could we rethink this whole thing? And we had brides going into like their weddings with voice memos on their phone recording. I mean, that we had engineers around the country going to different places, and then COVID hit. And a producer texted me and he said, a show called Gathering now sounds like a horror film. Right? The gathering literally became illegal. It became dangerous.
Yes.
It became, rather than a source of connection, a source of threat. And so we had to pause and reimagine. And the thing I noticed was the emails were still coming in, the direct messages on Instagram were still coming in, but the questions were a little different. And they were, do we still have our wedding? Do we pause our life? Do we do this on Zoom? Do we need all of those guests?
Right.
Do we still hold a fundraiser? And so we pivoted, and we, in 3 weeks, all with the team, all remote, we launched a podcast called, we dropped that podcast and we launched a new podcast called Together Apart. And we did 9 episodes of people all over the country, a teacher, a woman trying to host a baby shower, multiple couples trying to figure out their weddings, all types of specific gatherings. And that podcast really explores the question that you asked, which is, how do we still create meaning in modern life together? How do you still have a birthday party, but do it in a way that you're actually having people meaningfully connect beyond just singing happy birthday and blowing the candles out? Yeah, I'll give a very specific example to make it practical. I had a friend who, when I say meaning making, what do I mean by that? So say it's your birthday, or it's a loved one's birthday, and it's off, like, instead of asking what would be fun to do this year, right? That's getting to the activity really fast. Pause and ask, what is the need in my life this year that I might want to use my birthday and specific people in my life to help fulfill? Right. So a person I know was turning 50, and he realized that the need in his life, when he really thought about it, was that and this is his words, most people he knew after they turned 50 tended to contract. They took less risks. They moved to less cities. They didn't try to make new friends. And there were a few people in his life who were 60s and 70s, even 80s, who continued to expand.
Right.
And he wanted to most expand and keep accountability to expansion. So he invited people in his life to dinner. This is pre-COVID, but you could do it on a Zoom call. And he, just at the beginning of the night, he told that story, and he said, you all are here because what I most want to make sure is, like, when I feel like contracting, when I feel like not taking risks, when I feel like going the easy path, you each represent to me people who always expand. And I want to raise a toast to you. And also, the gift you can give me for the next 50 years is keep me courageous.
Wow. I love that. Having just turned 50, that is really good to hear. So again, staying with Gathering, what are the things that we are doing wrong in this new era of Gathering? And what are some of the things that we're doing right? What are we getting right? What are we getting wrong? And what are we getting right?
Beautiful question. I mean, I think first of all, I would say, we have a million different experiences. So what's part of what I say is wrong, other people may be doing right. So in a way, they answer each other's questions. I think a couple of mistakes that I see us making aren't that different from offline gatherings. So the first is making the assumption that if you have a dinner party or a staff meeting or a fundraiser, that we all just do it the same way, just sticking a camera in front of it.
Yeah. Right.
And so so I'll give an example. My mother-in-law is an educator. She teaches at a school, a high school, and she is an arts teacher. So she's a ceramics teacher. You can't get more physical than ceramics. Right. And she COVID hit, and she paused and she thought, what is my purpose as a teacher? She didn't say, now, how do I teach ceramics? across Zoom, she said, what is my purpose as a teacher? Why do I do this? And what is the need that I want to fulfill? And she thought about it and she realized the reason she teaches is she wanted to give her students the creative confidence to be able to build anything or something from nothing.
Right.
She also thought about her design constraints. She didn't want them having to purchase anything new or go, at that point, we didn't know how the virus spread or have to go outside to procure anything.
Right.
And so she created a ad hoc curriculum that was based on found objects in the home and paper mache. And I love this example because it's a very simple, she didn't assume that ceramics on Zoom had to look a certain way. She actually changed her medium. But she didn't change her purpose. And so I think a couple of just very simple tips is, I think that another mistake I see is overuse of Zoom and assuming that one technology has to fit for every purpose.
Right.
So for me, I think Zoom is helpful if you want to see each other's faces. I think a Zoom call where everybody's cameras are off is a very strange experience. It's almost like ghosts meeting. I have no idea what else you are doing. I think a phone call, right? A good old fashioned like conference line might be maybe a better form for that. But the second is like use breakout rooms. So if you have large groups, I mean, it's not rocket science, but you need to have, the right technology to have some amount of time where everyone's together and some amount of time where you break out into smaller groups. And then the third is to connect people. If you're talking specifically about Zoom, connect people early on. Use the chat function. Ask people things like, what's the view you see outside your window right now? What's one thing you did in the last week that you would have never imagined doing a year ago? Where in your house do you pace? Where are you sitting right now? If you have 400 people or 1,500 people in a chat, everyone can just put that in quickly. And there's a lot of ways you can very quickly create meaning through the chat, rather than sitting and kind of watching a webinar or feeling like it's a webinar, even if it's with your colleagues.
Okay, that's wonderful, and that's good to hear. Just a final question. Priya, what advice can you give us as we start to think about the holidays and how some of us will be gathering virtually this year? What type of advice can you give us with the upcoming holiday season?
So I know I sound like a broken record, but to ask, what is my or our need this year? And how do we gather around that? In what form? So the need for some families or friend groups may be to feel safe. For some others, it might be to reconnect after a really tough year. For some others, it might be to maintain the same ritual despite the chaos. Right? For others, it might be to have fun after a really bizarre, painful year, right? Whatever your, but don't skip that question and ask yourself it and ask your people that. Right. And then negotiate to, some common grounds. That's the first thing. So I'll give the example of Thanksgiving. So I know, one idea for some families, and I'm assuming if you're doing it virtually, you may still have people that you're quarantining with, or maybe you have people you feel safe bringing in, given tests or wherever you are in the country. And one version of Thanksgiving could be if you have 6 different families who traditionally come together physically but have decided not to this year, is each family or each family unit or friend unit makes the entire Thanksgiving meal, and you come together and you put on Zoom or phone or whatever technology you want to use, Google Meet, and you eat kind of together apart. Yeah. And talk about what you're grateful for, or talk about, choose one question. A different version, which I love, is that in the same group, say it's the same 6 families that have got together for 30 years in a row and this year can't, to come together and plan out the menu, and then each person take one dish.
That's a wonderful
idea. One person
idea.
Gets the green beans, one person gets the turkey, one person gets the cranberries, whatever it is. And part like this year is full of loss. This year is full of like us not having enough, and also us realizing that we do have enough, and all of the experiences in between. And so
Right.
creating a specific and unique moment that years from now you may say, do you remember that year when you got stuck with the green beans and that's all you had for Thanksgiving? Right? And so I think there's ways to come together that don't pretend we're not in the moment we're in, that actually
Right.
deeply acknowledge it in ways that you'll remember and your children will remember for the rest of their lives.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Priya. Just real quickly, how can all of our participants and viewers find out more about Gathering and more about you?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Let's see. One is you all can listen to Together Apart, which is a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And we also I send out every 2 weeks a newsletter, Art of Gathering newsletter with all types of ideas of how to navigate these times. Actually, the simplest way to sign up for that is to text the word gather, GATHER, text gather to 66866 on your cell phone. It's a super cool high-tech thing, and you can sign up for my newsletter and then continue to be in conversation with me, or follow, if you're on Instagram, follow me there at my handle, which is my name, Priya Parker. But thank you so much for having me, and I'd love to hear from you all. I'd love to hear how you all are trying these ideas out. I get a lot of inspiration and courage from you trying new things in your contexts. And so part of gathering better is gathering courageously, because doing things differently and gathering differently takes courage, but also courage is contagious.
Right. Well, Priya, again, thank you so much for talking with all of us. I'm going to affirm what you said. Please sign up for the newsletter. It is wonderful. I've had a chance to read it, and also the podcast is wonderful too. So thank you so much for joining us, Priya. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.